Welcome, everybody, to another exciting episode of HomeKit Insider. You've got me, as always, Andrew O'Hara, and joining me this week, I am very excited. It is the Chief Technology Officer from ADT, Gilles Drieu, which we practiced the pronunciation before we jumped on. So thank you, because I did not say it that last week when I teased your appearance. But thank you for joining me. We have so much fun stuff to talk about today.
Hi, Andrew. Nice to meet you, and thanks so much for having me in your show.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. ADT has been kind of like such a fixture in, guys. I guess it used to be more specifically the home security space, and now in today's world, it's essentially merged into the smart home space. So we have a lot to talk about on the ADT front of things. But before we get into all of that, let's hit the news for the week. So I guess one of the things that this is stuff that confuses me, and I feel like I confuse the audience with this. I don't know how you deal with standards over at ADT because they're so changing all the time and what you're even trying to target. But apparently, Matter 1.2 is maybe fully supported in Apple Home. And I say it with a confused inflection because originally it was like Apple had just announced that robotic vacuum cleaners were coming out in iOS 18. And we even had, Shane Watley on the episode, weeks ago, and he talked about how he had a Matter air purifier that would not add to the Home app. He said that device was not supported because even though purifiers are supported in HomeKit or Apple Home, they weren't supported when connecting via Matter. But now, apparently, Shane's got that purifier working, and we've heard from other sources that apparently maybe Matter 1.2 is supported in the Home app. And like Matter 1.2 brings fridges, the robotic vacuum cleaners, laundry machines, dishwashers, air quality sensors with like PM1, PM2.5, PM10, CO2, NO2, VOCs, CO2, ozone, radon, and formaldehyde. All of those in there. And it would make that ice maker we talked about last week from Govee, which is going to add Matter, work in the Home app. So I don't know. This has been confusing to me. I'm sure you don't have any, insight here onto Apple's strategy for Matter, but I mean, what do you make of all these standards kind of trying to commingle like this?
So no inside information on Apple strategy for sure, but what I can tell you is from my perspective as a smart home enthusiast for years and years, I love it. It's amazing. I think you mentioned the list of devices, and they had, I think, 9 new types of devices. When you start talking about smoke detector, CO detectors, I mean, this is super exciting. I don't know about you. We have one air purifier per rooms at our home, not Matter powered. So definitely following with a lot of enthusiasm how it's now compatible. You asked me a little bit how we look at it from an ADT perspective. We embrace them all, right? I mean, we have a thread radio in our latest ADT Plus security base. We can come back to that maybe if you'd like later. We embrace Z-Wave. Of course, we are very excited to see the progress on Matter. And so any new version for us is just a gain in convenience and expanding the ecosystem for our users from us. So this is really amazing, and very happy for Shane if he managed to get his air quality device to work.
I mean, it just seems like, you've got, multiple tracks and trying to target what you're going to ship with, because you have to worry about the Matter spec, where they are on their roadmap, but at the same time, you have to worry about the ecosystems. You have to worry about Apple Home and Google and SmartThings and Amazon and what version of Matter they support, and then try to plan it all within your hardware and your software. So it just seems like it would give me perpetual headaches.
It's very interesting. I completely agree with you. There's some growing pains, right, from users' perspective and so on. But you can see that we are at the turning point as well, right? Like a lot of the hard work to get to this point was extremely hard. Now, incrementally, to develop the ecosystem, to get this sort of like, misconnection or disconnect at times will kind of go away over time. There's no doubt in my mind.
That's true. That I think is the hope, and especially as we kind of get out some of the low hanging fruit, the stuff that Matter has to add that the ecosystems themselves already had, and now we're just kind of adding it into this one to get it up to speed with everything as it was before. Well, going into some new stuff, some new accessories, we have more information, possible information on Apple's smart home accessory, which sounds very cool. I know I added this to the last minute of the show notes because 9 to 5 just found some code in there, so I wanted to make sure we threw it in the episode for everyone. So they're talking about it's just called Home Accessory, is how it's identified in the Apple source code. Apparently, this new device will be running the A18 chip. It's likely to support Apple Intelligence. It does have an A18 chip, which is the same thing found on like the 16 and 16 Plus, so it would be compatible with Apple Intelligence. It has a built-in camera that can be used for FaceTime or video calls. Supposedly, it can run or can identify things with that camera as well. So not just video calls, but it can identify different people and then give them personal requests, similar to HomePod. But it can also identify hand gestures. So you could like wave to say like answer a call or decline a call or whatever it is. But then it would know who the person doing those gestures are based on facial recognition. It can play media on its own. So it can act, just as a smart speaker, anything like that. But it can also be an AirPlay receiver. And this is the part that I think makes the most sense, is it has a customizable lock screen. And in my mind, it's very much going to be a mix between standby mode and those little cards on the new tvOS 18 interface. I mean, Apple all of a sudden decided we needed a new interface to change the screensavers for Apple TV. No, it didn't need those just for Apple TV. I think they make sense on another device. Plus, Apple added those Snoopy ones, which still aren't out yet. Those, again, would make very much sense on this home accessory. The last thing is it's supposed to have more of a square-ish display. Who knows what the final aspect ratio is, but the test devices right now have a square-ish display. We've been talking about these rumors in different forms for a while. How do you see kind of Apple's approach here to this?
Very interesting. So, as you were reading the spec, or at least what leaked out of this code, I almost felt like, I don't know if you know, I used to work in the Chromecast team in the Nest Hub organization at Google for almost a decade, and it felt like that spec in some ways. Or if you remember the portal from, so clearly you can imagine that's a very natural evolution to now add a screen, a camera obviously for gesture recognitions, and then and so on and so forth, obviously with all the capabilities that you can imagine that Apple can integrate from their existing ecosystem. So this is super exciting to me, because if there's one company that can actually manage to get this integration right and really seamless for users, it's really Apple. So definitely looking forward to trying it out, to see what it's all about.
What's been kind of confusing. So first off, this is actually what sounds good to me. This is what I have been asking for as a user. I want an Apple smart display that can show me Apple Intelligence and, results on a display visually. I can follow along with recipes that I could use my hand to control, like all of this stuff. This is what I want, basically. But then we've heard those other rumors that Apple's working on like that smart home robot type thing. And then there's going to be like a version of this, but with like an articulating arm. And that seems excessive just to move around to follow you in the room for FaceTime calls or something. But then I think it may have been Gurman or Quo that had said Apple's first smart home device with Apple Intelligence would be that robotic one. And to me, that seems wild. This seems like what Apple should launch first. It seems perfectly reasonable, more price, aware, not anything extreme. I hope this is what we get. I don't know if you've heard those other rumors about like the robotic one and moving and all that stuff.
No, I first time I hear about it. I must have missed this. It is exciting. I do agree with you. It's, in a way, we're probably not completely ready for that. And if they decide, and when they decide to release something like that, Apple or other companies that I think have been dabbling in a robotic kind of field, it'll have to be feel safe and work extremely well. So this device, it would seem like to be the perfect stepping stone towards that. And there's all sorts of things that today, let's say with Apple TV alone, you are not, maybe not so convenient. Like for instance, full duplex communication, like, video conferencing with your family and so on. So if this device helps with that as well, that's just great, right?
I agree. I mean, I think that's a really easy, push for Apple more into the workspace as well, being having like some sort of conference room device. And if it could pair with an Apple TV at the same time, use it like a presenter display plus an Apple TV, like there's a lot of things that it could do that would make sense with this. So if it's got an A18, to me, that says sooner rather than later. Like Apple, I'm hoping maybe in 2025 we'll actually see this device since we're reaching the end of the year here. It doesn't seem like it's going to make it, but by the time Apple actually finishes its first bound of Apple Intelligence features, maybe we'll actually get this device here.
Hopefully.
Well, in terms of things that are shipping, I have one right here. It is the new Google TV streaming box. I don't know. I can't remember. Google Streamer, TV Streamer. Is that what it's called? I think. More will come on this for anyone who's like following the podcast. Here it is compared to my Apple TV, my latest Apple TV here. You can see what it's similar size and everything. But I'll hitting the high points of this until we do a full compare. They've been following Apple's steps in really integrating their product. So it has like the similar casting audio to your Google Nest speakers and to Pixel Buds, all of that stuff. It has Thread border router support. It can act as a Matter hub. So you got the smart home tech in there. They have more than 10,000 apps that you can add to it. I guess the latest numbers I saw, tvOS had like 20,000. So just, okay. So maybe a little behind on the apps, but my favorite thing is they actually have a button right on the back that you can use to find your remote. You just press that and it'll beep at you. It's priced at $99 for 32 gigs of storage. Apple's pricing is a little weird because you technically get 64 gigs of storage for $130 on the Apple TV, but that $130 Apple TV does not have Thread or Ethernet. So if you want the Thread and the Ethernet, you have to go up to the next version, which is at $150, but that also gives you 128 gigs of storage. So there's no like direct compare, but it's cheaper. If you're just going for a base model, it does have Ethernet on it and Thread for the $99. So if you're looking for just that, it's cheaper on the Google TV, but you do get like more storage on the Apple TV models, especially if you're playing games and stuff. But yeah, have you tried any of like the Google streamer? I don't know what type of streamer do you use?
Well, all of the above, right? I've been using Chromecast from the early days before even it supported. It was powered by Android. I use Apple TV. I have a Sony TV that has the Android OS as well.
Do you actually use the TV interface like to stream from?
We do, and not just me. My entire family loves it. It's been, and combined with YouTube TV as well, we find that as such like a seamless experience. So that's a very personal opinion, right? But this integration right there, from the turning on the TV to navigating, for us has been like a life changer. And we also, of course, that was when we, disconnected from the cable as well. So it was a welcome change.
I think it's definitely going to depend on which of the TVs, because like I was over at my parents' house over the weekend and I was signing in to pick something, Hulu or whatever, to watch football. And it was the most painful experience. Like the interface, every time we moved on like the keyboard, it was like so slow and laggy. But there's going to be a difference between what was probably some budget TV versus like, I mean, Sony ones are already more on the high end. So they're going to have a faster processor and stuff on the inside. But yeah, that TV interface was so painful to use. I'm coming from an Apple TV. So going from an Apple TV to that, I don't even know what brand it was, but it was painful. And I was like, this is a reason like I like the Apple TV, because this is so difficult and slow. And like, I just hated using it. But I've not used the Sony one in a while.
Yeah, and the Sony, to your point, it needs to be one of these models that really has enough horsepower. So I've tried both with different family members in our household have like different models. And you're right, there's some models that are less convenient. Not to compare, different brands here, but there is a huge advantage to use Apple TV. So we have all of the above, not all of it, but a lot of it, and then we kind of swap back and forth. Which, by the way, I don't know what your perspective might be, but from a consumer perspective, at times it's interesting. Now it's almost too much choice. It's been for a few years, so.
Yeah, I agree. Another little bit of news, there's a new second generation Ome Smart Knob. These basically go onto your stove. They replace the existing knobs there, and they can alert you if you've left your stove on, or if you have a gas stove, if maybe you have inadvertently knocked it and you have gas running. So it can send you alerts to your phone letting you know that your burner is on, anything like that, which can be especially important like if you leave your house, and it lets you control them. So if you left your house and it's like, hey, you left, did you leave your stove on? You can tell it to turn it off, and it's able to actually do that for you. There's a lot of benefits here. Like, I mean, just trying to be, maybe when you're cooking and you realize something is going off, you'll be able to use some sort of, voice command and say, hey, turn off the burner, and it'll turn it off so your hot stops boiling over or something if you got your hands full with a kid. I don't know. But on the other hand, it's also great for anyone who is older. We have like a gas stove, like our family property, whatever, family like vacation house. And it's always a concern someone's just going to walk by and bump it and not notice. And something like this is able to help give you a little bit of peace of mind that that's happening. And these new ones are a lot smaller than the original ones. So I think there's a lot of benefits to these, especially on gas stoves where it's a constant concern. But I'm glad they made these smaller. The first ones were huge, and I tried it, and I couldn't even fit like pots on the stove because of how much my knobs are in the back. So I couldn't fit like a pot and the Ome Smart Knob on there at the same time. So these are just barely larger than the actual like manufacturer ones.
I will tell you, looking at the latest on this, I fell in love with that. So I don't have them at home, and completely agree with you. The point you're making on aging in place or smart aging. So I can give you two slants. Like from an ADT perspective, the peace of mind and the safety is our mission, right? Keeping people safe in their houses. So when you see a device like this on the smart home side, that's a perfect use case, if you will, of the integration of a security kind of mindset and smart home. That's one of the many where integrating smart home to actually augment the security and the safety of users and is perfect there. I will tell you, I saw recently the latest model, and I'm definitely considering like changing all my knobs at home for sure. I had one question which you may or may not know, which is like some stoves you can also go the other way around to simmer.
It
And
works.
it does.
I believe so, because on mine I have it's like you go to the left and it's the big burner, and you go to the right and it's a small burner. Yeah, I think it supports both of those as well.
That's amazing.
I know. Well, you heard it here first, folks. ADT is acquiring Ome Smart Knobs after their. Okay, I'm kidding. But
Yeah.
yes, they are very cool. Okay, so Home Depot, they have their I think called like Hub Space, which is their smart home system that they do. And they, for years now, I keep getting like invites to like their Hub Space presentation, and they show off a few connected accessories. And I generally don't go, and I don't watch it or anything like that, because usually they're more kind of entry level products, and they all work specifically with the Hub Space like app and everything. There's never any support for Apple Home in there. But after seeing the Masonite smart door like 2 years ago at CES, that Home Depot helped roll out, it was really cool. And this year they have their new Feather Space door, I think is what it's called. But it is a new, much more affordable smart door. And the big one with this is it has a big panel of glass. There's a few different styles, but it's a panel of glass. And then with just a tap or a voice command, you can change the glass from opaque to clear, like whenever you want. And I've seen those materials that you can put on your windows and change it with, electrical current. And like, I really got close to trying to do that and setting up a shortcut to program it, but I never did. But seeing that built into the door is very cool. These start off at only like $800, which if you've priced outdoors, It's honestly not that bad for a front door. It's got like a fiberglass core. They're paintable. They got weatherproofing or weather strips built in. These seem very reasonable. They work with Hubspace as well as Amazon and Google. Nothing specific for Apple Home, but since there's literally nothing like this, it still got me tilting my head a little bit. We've been looking for a new front door, and this seems really neat.
Yes, I mean, it's amazing. It feels like sci-fi a bit. Now it's just out of reach.
I know they sent me another update about it today, and it just looks really cool. The other one, like the Masonite one that they did before, they had all this other stuff built in, like the smart lock and doorbells, and it was powered, and some of these other things, which seemed a little tougher to deal with, and you were really stuck into like their ecosystems or Yale, and there wasn't any kind of wiggle room with other products. But this is something that I could try out. Arlo has their new Secure 5 launch. So this is basically their home monitoring solution using the Arlo cameras. They're now building in AI powered, they say innovations. There's complete person recognition, so it'll be able to alert you who is at your home with personalized alerts with names from your private library of saved faces. Vehicle recognition, so it'll be able to tell you known vehicles versus new vehicles and give you different alerts based on that. And there's custom detections where you can train Arlo's AI for your own things, for certain objects, triggers, whatever it is. This is, I think I said it, but beta. And it can do things like knowing a garage door is open, lights left on in places, all these different things, and then use them to create custom triggers, which I think is probably the coolest part of all of this. The facial recognition, that's something that we kind of already have with Apple Home doorbells, because Apple's able to use your photo library, any people you've identified in the Photos app, and use those to identify anyone visiting your house if you have a HomeKit Secure powered video doorbell. But I think this is really cool. I mean, as Matter and stuff expands, it's things like ADT's monitoring services or Arlo's secure monitoring services. It's these extra services that are going to pull people different ways. So I'm glad to see that we're continuing to see innovation here, even with things like Matter that are bringing things together and more standardized.
I completely agree. I mean, it's so encouraging to see innovation and all these improvements in the world of smart home security, because it really does foster, to your point, it does foster innovation. We do have person detection, as you know, in the ADT Plus system, we integrate with the Google Nest cameras. So we do have person detection, familiar faces detection, as well as garage detection, which is one of the new ones. But when you see things like specific vehicle recognition or custom detection, that is really like the next phase of what we would expect as consumers. So this is really amazing.
Yeah, I have an Arlo doorbell sitting around, and I kind of want to try to set it up again just to see how well that works. Last two pieces of news. Sonos has a new update out for their app, continuing to bring back those features. Alarms are back, so you can wake up to your music, have them turn off, all that kind of stuff. So alarms back in the Sonos app. And Bosch has a new Radiator controller. I think this was previously announced, but now it's shipping. So Matter over Thread Radiator controller valve can easily then work with Apple Home. So that basically covers it for the news. You want to pivot and talk about some ADT stuff?
I would love to, but Andrew, if that's okay, on the last one, the Bosch Radiator controller, do you mind if I had almost a personal note on this?
Bring it. Let's hear it.
So do you remember a company called Netamo? It's more of a European.
I do. Absolutely. Yeah. I love them.
So, and I was at Nest, involved with a Nest thermostat and so on, and we had obviously a SKU for Europe. And part of my family is still in France. My parents used the Netamo, which was acquired by a much bigger company called Legrand. So when I saw the Bosch Radiator controller, which looks very much similar, question for you, isn't it amazing to see how a modern, especially now, Matter over Thread device can bring very old devices, radiators, some of them are like decades, half a century old, to the modern age, with zero effort. That's really as simple as removing the old valves with the new one. And for having tried this with the Netamo and the Bosch looks the same, it's amazing. It's such a such an amazing, nice, not just convenience, but energy saving and just modernization of a house. So super exciting. I wish I had radiators here in the US to try it out.
My great aunt actually had radiators. Like she had a super old Victorian house, and they had radiators everywhere. You know, they were spooky as you grew up because they made all those weird noises. But yeah, like something like this I could easily see, and I know they've been phased out in a lot of places, but like you said, it's such an easy way to retroactively make something like that smart. And on what I also think that is also super encouraging is that we're seeing this new connected product coming from a company like Bosch. Like, you know, sometimes the bigger companies, they aren't as quick to support things like Matter or Thread because they're, you know, nervous about it. But to see like a company like Bosch come out with not only like a good product like this, but to also adopt Matter and Thread at the same time, I'm very happy to see that, especially.
100%, absolutely.
Okay, so before we get into all the ADT stuff, why don't you give me a little bit of backstory about you? I know you have spent time kind of all over Silicon Valley. We've talked about your time with Google and the Chromecast and the Nest stuff. You know, what else have you done? How did you end up at ADT, and how's it been? You know, working over there so far.
Sure. Well, I came to the Silicon Valley in the very late 90s, in 97, as an intern. And I spent the first 10 years working on web technologies. First, on the technology you may or may not remember, the Flash plugin, way back when, before the browser war was well over. Who remembers these days? And then joining Apple during the pre-iPhone era, where the browsers were still sort of like trying to figure out their path. And we can come back on that if you're interested. There's some intriguing parallels or analogies we can draw between the smart home ecosystem and the web ecosystem, but you know, we can come back to that. So I spent about 10 years on web technologies, which led me via iPhone and iOS and iPad iOS devices to the mobile world, which led me in turn to the smart home ecosystem when I joined Google in 2014, which was, I would say, 8 months after Google acquired Nest. We were still on the Palo Alto campus at the time. And that's when I, you know, met folks like Tony Fedor, Grant Erickson on the Thread side. You probably know Grant. That was one of the godfathers, if not the godfathers of Thread, and so on and so forth. At Google, I stayed about 7 years working mainly on smart home technologies. And the last 2.5 years or so, I worked on data protections and privacy engineering. And the backstory to that is after having seen, you know, the importance of data and data privacy on the smart home ecosystem, as you can imagine, I really wanted to explore how Google and quite frankly the industry could tackle this at scale, if you will. So that was a very interesting little stint here in data protection land. And
That's always
then,
curious because, sorry, not to break in, but we don't usually talk about kind of Google's spot there in the privacy. Because when, at least when I look back at the early days of the smart home stuff, I remember HomeKit, which was billed as like so specifically private and secure. And then you had Amazon, who in its early days of its assistant was literally slapping that label on anything because people could just download like the code and put it onto any device without really any, you know, privacy checks or security checks. Like they weren't going, like Apple products, you know, had to be shipped out to Apple where they tested them, signed off for them, and they had a hardware security chip in them, all that stuff. And there was all those products people would buy like around the holidays, like the smart plugs that were so easily hacked. And Google, I feel like, was kind of in the middle. They weren't as slow as Apple, but they weren't as kind of boisterous and gung ho as Amazon was. So like that's a really interesting part there on how Google was approaching that.
yeah, and happy to share a little more on this, at least what I can share. But one of the strengths at Google of a company like Google is really back-end technologies, right, at scale, and everything entailed with this, which interestingly enough, data protection is in the center of all this, right? So there's very interesting things such as being in the middle, I don't know, but interesting perspectives and research and enormous progress that's been made over the years. I'll give you just a similar example of how that part of the industry and the technology has been making progress, right? You're probably very familiar with the DMA, the Digital Market Act, coming from Europe. And so I spent my last years at Google working on an article of it called DMA 6.9, which has to do with data portability, to your point earlier. And so empowering users is also, about enabling them to get their data in a secure way. And this way enrich their own ecosystem. So that's a very broad topic, but absolutely, this is complicated. It's sort of also very complex to get right. So for companies to have that at the forefront of their strategy is crucial these days. It's not enough to just deliver great products with great technology. It has to be mindful of users' data and data security and privacy, obviously.
Cool. So then you went from Google. Then was it directly over to ADT?
Yes. And the transition was very natural. After 2 or 3 years in the data protection world, the passion for smart home devices, and quite frankly, security as well, because if you remember the days where Nest was delivering the Nest Secure device, which was deprecated, I think, in April this year, I was part of that adventure. And so there's really a complete connection between the trust that a company like ADT brings as the number one security trusting brand in the United States, and the ability to be in people's homes for a very noble mission, which is, again, to keep them safe, peace of mind, and security, and then augmenting and including the smart home world to a security system. And that's really what got me extremely excited about joining ADT and see how I could humbly contribute to this adventure.
Well, the one thing that I want to press you on first is ADT. This is it predated you, but ADT very much partnered with Google, right? They have been very tight knit with Google for a while now. And I think ADT even had some HomeKit products that I don't even know if they're still around anymore. But why should Apple users, especially those who are interested in Apple Home, why should they continue looking at ADT right now when you guys are so tight with Nest products, which only just now have started to play nice thanks to the adoption of Matter on like the latest round of thermostats? That's kind of my first thing is I mean, most of your bundles now are that you can do like your self setup stuff. A lot of it is like bundled with Nest hardware. And if you don't want to go Nest, or if you want to go Apple Home, how does ADT fit into that?
It's a really good question. So, and you're entirely right. We integrate with the Nest, the Google ecosystem and the Google Nest ecosystem when it comes to cameras and even thermostats and so on and so forth. And to your point earlier, that strategy choice was done like a few years ago, and that's been extremely beneficial, by the way, for ADT and our customers in terms of adding AI, as we discussed earlier, in terms of person detection, familiar faces, and so on and so forth. How is it relevant for anyone, including Apple users and folks that have embraced the Apple ecosystem? I'm one of them as well. Is that we believe in open standards. We believe that there is a connective tissue that can be created, and quite frankly, I think Matter is starting creating this connective tissue between any devices that users really want to be able to have within their home. So you have a security system, you have a media system, and so on and so forth. So Matter is already connecting, between an Amazon, a Google, an Apple ecosystem in the world of smart home. And that's actually the promise of Matter from the inception, really. And at ADT, we support open standards. We believe that. So we support Matter. We are very enthusiastic about the progress made by Matter. We differentiate a little bit what you would call traditionally security, safety devices like door and window sensors, smoke and smart home detectors. So we do handle currently our own devices, and that's one part of what we do. But we also integrate with Z-Wave, and we want to do better, and we are very active in that domain with also Matter compatible devices. So when you are in that, when you've bridged the gap, if you will, using open web standards and Matter as an example, then that's how it becomes very relevant for anyone, for Apple users, for Google users, and obviously for ADT users.
So with Matter, what part of an ADT system will show in like the home app? What stuff, via Matter can communicate there?
It's a good question. I don't know how much I can share, or is it too soon? But what I will tell you is, today we are really actively thinking about this. This is actually a very deep question for us, because your question is what type of ADT devices, as an example, would show up in the Apple Home app. And today I don't have an answer for you today, but we're looking at this two ways. Like a few weeks ago, I went to Austin for the Works With conference that was organized by Silicon Labs, and you had all the Matter experts, the Z-Wave experts, and obviously all of us were contributing to this. I do think, and I'm not exactly answering your question, but I'm going on a tangent a little bit. There is really something fundamental here: is how do we zoom out a little bit? So I'll give you a personal perspective, which you may have considered. When Matter was created in the very early days, right? Thread existed since, before 2014, right? And leveraged internally at Nest, and then he was open sourced and so on. Matter is an evolution, not anymore, but initially in the inception, the initial proposal was around a weave. If you're familiar with the application layer that was on top of Thread. And the idea was really, how do we do a better job, all of us, providing smart home devices to our customers, to abstract the complexity, to create that connective tissue, once more, between all these devices and enable them to interoperate with each other. I'll leave you with this. Like at the time we were creating and evolving Matter, a chip at the time and then Matter, I don't remember a day where we would talk about Z-Wave devices necessarily, as an example, right? At ADT, we do support the Z-Wave devices. We are at the board. We are very active there as well as CSA. But why couldn't we imagine a world where it doesn't really matter anymore, right? It doesn't really matter, where you can just be a consumer of a security product and then benefit from the full integration of your Z-Wave devices as well as your Matter devices and so on and so forth. So I went a little bit on a tangent. My apologies for this, but it is more of our perspective. So in that regard, what makes more sense from an ADT business perspective, combining this with the convenience for our users? Is it to show ADT devices within the home app, and or to also leverage Matter devices within our ecosystem? So see Matter devices such as, we just talked about smoke and CO sensors in Matter 1.12. Wouldn't it be cool in the future, in a world where, the ADT ecosystem could be enriched by some of these devices, Matter devices detecting smoke and CO? So that's one example.
I agree. But I think it gets hard right now. Like, okay, I have ADT. I want them to monitor my home, because I do think the one thing that is missing on the Apple Home side of things is like professional monitoring of some sort. And I did, imagine like that'd be something that Apple could, open up an API to whatever ADT, Abode, anyone else who wants to be one of these monitoring services that can offer that as a convenience feature. But I want to be able to have monitoring, but like you're a contact sensor, like that's going to be paramount to security, right? To trigger a security system or alarm response. But I also want to be able to use that same contact sensor to trigger a light switch, in a room or something. Or maybe I want to be able to detect someone on the porch and turn lights on, or even just showing, my doorbell on my Apple TV. And it still feels like everything is still piecemeal from different spots, and Matter is bringing it closer together. And it just, as we've talked about many times on the show, it's been a slow rollout of waiting for Matter to actually connect all of these things to make them play nice.
This is so this is exactly the end goal, and I completely agree with your assessment. So you should have sensors, inputs, sensory input, if you will, and actuators. And matter is really the tissue that bring them together in terms of automation. It's already happening. I'll give you a piece of information in the context of what we're trying to influence forward, right? In the last CSA meetup in Washington, one of our engineering leads went there and starting having conversations about how can we integrate even more security-centric devices in the Matter ecosystem to the spec, right? So this is a level of conversations currently happening. It is very early, but there's not much you can totally extrapolate that within a few years, these sensors that you see in your home app can participate to your ecosystem to turn on a light or turn off your thermostat if your window is open, and at the same time contribute to the security system. We are not far off this, absolutely not. And at ADT, we are very actively not only observing, but we really would love to influence further that convergence. It's extremely important for our customers as well.
Well, one feature that I think I had heard of this before you guys launched it. It might have been like a very early meeting with you guys on stuff, but you guys now officially have announced your trusted neighbor feature. And I think this is really cool because I know one of the problems that Apple has faced with it, a lot of its first responder rollouts, like the crash detection and emergency SOS and all these things, is trying to prevent like too many, false, first responder call outs to things. And I feel like this very much fits in with that. So can you tell us a little bit about Trusted Neighbor and how that works?
Yes, absolutely. And before even I tell you about Trusted Neighbor, I should tell you about our ADT new product, ADT Plus platform. So earlier this year, we deployed nationally what we call ADT Plus, which is really our new product offering. There is the evolution from previous solutions is that we do have a full platform in place. So from a backend perspective, now we have a lot of flexibility to integrate and add capabilities and services on top of the platform. Trusted Neighbor is one of them. So to ground a little bit what Trusted Neighbor is all about. We all have neighbors, and today we can all give them keys and trust them enough that in case of an emergency, they can come in our house. Now, Trusted Neighbor enables you to not to have to do that anymore. You can invite them. You can give them access to your home based on a policy that you can very precisely configure. As an example, if there's a water leak alarm, your Trusted Neighbor, using the exact same ADT Plus mobile application, right? They'll see just a different UI. They'll get a notification and say, oh, there is a water leak at Andrew's house, and you have about 2 hours to kind of go there. Then you'll go to the door, it'll just open. You can open it via a variety of entry methods, the app, a PIN code, and so on. We do leverage the integration with the Nest doorbell to recognize faces. So we do have a multi-factor authentication system. And then your trusted neighbor can enter your house. They don't have to worry about your security system. It's completely seamless to them. So they don't have to disarm your system. They don't have to worry about any of that. They just go in, and then when they're ready to leave because it's addressed, they can call the plumber or whatnot. Then they leave and they just end the visit. And your house at that point is locked automatically. So something I didn't mention, which I should have mentioned, we're also partnering with Yale, and we have a dedicated lock that integrates seamlessly to our platform at the firmware level, as well as the backend level and the mobile application level. So you leave the house as a trusted neighbor, the door locks, your system rearm in the state it was in, and you're done. And so this is the kind of service that now we can really consider and see. We shipped the first version of it on August 15th, and then we had an additional enhanced version on September 12th. So that's a lot of information, Andrew. I hope that made some level of sense. But
yes, absolutely, it does, and that's nice when you have things that can play so well together. Of course, I still wish there was like HomeKit integration into all of this, but it still is nice. It's almost, do you find it to be a burden for users to have to ask? Because this is something that we've looked at with on the Apple Home side of, having to ask your neighbors to download the ADT app and go through all this enrollment stuff. And Apple's kind of been trying to get rid of that a little bit with its home key sharing. Of course, you can't do much with on Android devices, but you don't have to, like, if I have a level lock or an August lock or anything like that, okay, so just go ahead, down the lock, download the app, create a profile, accept my invitation, and it feels like a lot of steps. Have you seen that to be at all a barrier in starting to use this?
That's a very interesting question, because I was wondering also in my specific case when I started like dog fooding the service, and it turns out that it wasn't the case at all. I have two very close neighbors, like one around sort of like our same sort of demographics, and but not necessarily like extremely tech savvy in a way. And that was like a breeze, right? Because the only thing you really have to do, you get an SMS, you click a link, you create a password, you're done. Literally, you download an app and you're absolutely done. So there's really nothing else. You don't have to be an ADT customer. You don't have to have, a monitoring plan. It's free as a trusted neighbor or helper. We also have two categories. I should have mentioned a helper would be maybe someone that comes and water your plants or walk your dog. So we do differentiate slightly the policies. So it hasn't been an issue, Andrew. Now, I do see your point in terms of convenience, but from a user's perspective, if they're already an ADT customer, as an example, they can also become somebody else's trusted neighbor. And in that case, the barrier of entry is none. And if they are not an ADT customer, it's really relatively simple. We made the flow as seamless as we possibly can. And then eventually, if they want to become an ADT customer, then they already have the app, the account, and it's seamless for them.
Cool. Well, I find so much of this fascinating. I know my parents, like growing up, we had, ADT security system, and I remember hitting the buttons on the way out of the house. And when we bought our current house, we still have, there is an ADT panel on the wall, and I am 90% sure that it is structural. Like, it will not be removed. There is a wire wrapped around it, and we have never been able to remove this thing for the 5 years that we have been at this place. But it's so funny to see what was then, kind of like that hardwired professional install. I know you still do professional installs, but now to see ADT starting to pivot to the self-install and the new platforms and everything like that is really, really interesting. What can you give us anything else going into the future? Like, what else gets you excited? Is there anything that we can hope to hear from ADT soon? Where's the future for ADT looking? What can you leave us on?
So before I tell you about the future, I like to build on your example with your family members. We do have something that is, and there's only so much I can share, but it will be released in the context of the ADT Plus product line. We call that the translator. And these examples, we all have those, right? Older ADT systems that are, the keypad and all these things. And what we believe in is really to bring the latest technology to our customers. And so we've created a product we call Translator. And it's really the way I would look at it, as opposed to look at it from a backwards compatibility perspective or so on. It's really for us a connective tissue between all the existing sensors that people already have in their house. In some cases, it's even wired. You remember like the pre-wired houses where the sensors would be in the windows and doors?
Oh, yeah.
Builders maybe do less of that these days. My house is from the early 2000s and I have it. So I really don't want to add more sensors on my doors. I want to be able to leverage that connectivity, that wiring. And so our translator will be able to, with a very simple installation, connect to the older sensors and then bring all the power and the latest technology of ADT Plus to all our existing customers virtually, right? So this is something I wanted to put out there because it is a connection to the previous system, so the past, if you will, but that brings them to the future, which is in the present already. And we really strongly believe in that. We think it's going to be very important for our existing users to be able, if they choose to do so, to lean on, our integration with the Nest cameras, our trusty neighbor features, and so on and so forth. Well, speaking of the future, there's something that it's near and dear to my heart, and that's okay with you. I like to share it and maybe make an analogy with that web ecosystem that we saw a few years ago. Would it be okay with you?
Absolutely.
Nobody remembers. So I mentioned that I spent a few years at Apple working on HTML5 and creating GPU accelerated browsers. Nobody remembers those years. That was 15 years ago. I'm sure the latest generation would probably not even understand some of the things I'm just about to tell you. But at the time, browsers were not compatible with each other. I mean, HTML5 was nascent. It was all about who would be the best browser to play a video and so on and so forth. Plugins like Flash and others, Silverlight and other plugins were trying to bridge to be that connective tissue. At the time, I was very heavily involved in trying to see how open web standards could really streamline all this and remove all the barriers. Apple believed in this very strongly. It was, of course, very confidential, but when iPhone and iPad came out without the Flash plugin and with GPU accelerated browsers, it was a game changer for the industry. And over time, it became table stakes. Nobody remembers a world where you cared about which browser you really use. Not for these reasons. Everything is compatible. And I saw you smile earlier when I mentioned, there may be some analogies with the smart home ecosystem. And quite frankly, I think there's a ton of analogies. Like even the days of Matter. I mean, we just talked for a few minutes about how tedious it can be to go from one version of Matter to another, and everything is sort of like not following up at the same pace. Fast forward 5 years from now, few people will remember these years. It'll be seamless, not just with Matter. If I had a prediction, and I would love to see, is nobody will remember the difference between a Z-Wave device, a Matter device, or other devices. I think if we do things well, there will be open standards that will just abstract that complexity from our users' perspective. And that promise happened over and over again in the industry. I don't want to go too far because definitely I don't want to date myself, but I was still in, middle school, but for printers, that was the exact same thing. I mean, we've seen that over and over again. I think we are in a new phase where if we extrapolate based on the past, in 10 years from now, we can not only have like devices in our houses that will be completely interacting with each other via standards that are fully operational and help these devices interoperate. But I will tell you, and we will be able to have a mini Jarvis in our houses. I don't think we're far off. AI as a layer on top of that, we are not far off being able to talk to our devices, like maybe the one that you mentioned that's been removed from Apple. That is the next promise. So we are looking at all this at ADT. We're working on building services on top of ADT Plus, but also how can we combine the power of AI on our devices and on our partners' devices. So I hope that's helpful, but.
Well, thank you, Gilles, for joining me on the show. If anyone wants to find more out about ADT and the latest services, there is links inside of the show notes. Is there anything else you'd want to point anyone towards?
I would encourage everyone to go to the ADT site and just explore what ADT Plus is about and Trusted Neighbor. Other than that, I really wanted to thank you, Andrew, for welcoming me in your show. It's been really a pleasure to meet you and have this conversation today.
Absolutely. You can join me anytime. Everybody else listening, do what you do best. Give this a 5, 10, 100-star rating on your podcast player of choice. Watch the video version of this that hopefully lacks the stuttering that was for some reason found on last week's episode, even though nothing had changed, over at youtube.com/HomeKit Insider. Otherwise, we'll catch you guys in the next episode.